One afternoon, Richard Cole, the rich CEO, walked into the cafeteria. As he glanced around, his eyes landed on a little girl sitting alone at a table in the corner. Her lunchbox was broken, and there was only an old bottle of water beside it. The children around her were laughing, mocking her for having such a simple lunch. She tried her best to ignore them, but the embarrassment was clear on her face. Richard's attention stayed on her. He wasn't sure why, but something made him walk over to her table. "Hey," he said softly, pulling a chair to sit beside her. The little girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. She didn't say anything, but the weight of her discomfort filled the space. "Is this your lunch?" Richard asked, motioning toward her broken lunchbox and the bottle of water. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Wes." Richard smiled gently. "Sometimes. Simple is all you need." The girl didn't respond, but her tense shoulders seemed to relax a bit. Richard wasn't in a hurry, so he stayed with her. "Do you mind if I sit with you?" he asked, trying to ease her nervousness. She hesitated for a moment but then nodded. Richard sat down beside her, his presence offering her a sense of calm. The laughter from the other children continued in the background. But for the first time that day, the little girl wasn't alone. They ate together in quiet solidarity, and Richard realized that sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change everything. 2 Now. Here's Chapter 2, continuing from where the first chapter left off. Chapter 2. A glimpse of hope. The next day, Richard found himself back at the cafeteria. He wasn't sure why he was drawn here again, but he knew he had to see how the little girl was doing. He had thought about her all night, wondering if that small moment of kindness had made any difference in her day. As he entered, he scanned the room. There she was, sitting in the same spot as the day before. This time, however, she wasn't alone. A few children had gathered around her, but this time, they weren't laughing. They were talking to her, and the atmosphere felt different. Richard walked over and smiled when he saw the change. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching. The little girl glanced up, and when she saw him, her face lit up. "Hello," Richard said, taking a seat beside her again. The children around her noticed and quickly scattered, as if they had been expecting him. "Looks like you've made some friends," Richard said, his voice warm. The little girl nodded, her face now a bit more confident. "I'm Emma," she said, her voice stronger than the day before. "Emma, huh?" Richard smiled. "I'm glad to see things are better today." She smiled back shyly, a small but genuine smile. It was a smile that Richard knew would grow stronger over time. As they shared lunch once more, Richard couldn't help but feel that this small act of kindness might be the beginning of something much larger. And in that moment, he knew he would keep coming back, not just to share lunch, but to help Emma in ways he hadn't yet realized. The next day, Richard found himself once again walking into the cafeteria. He hadn't planned on coming back, but something about yesterday stayed with him. The brief moment of connection he shared with Emma had affected him in a way he couldn't shake off. He wondered if she was doing okay. If she had been able to feel the smallest bit of comfort after his brief visit. As Richard entered the cafeteria, he glanced around, scanning the room for her. He wasn't sure why he cared so much, but there was something about her that made him want to check in, even if just for a moment. There she was, sitting alone at her usual corner table. The broken lunchbox still sat beside her, and the bottle of water remained, but today, there was a slight difference. Instead of the usual mocking, a small group of children had gathered around her. They weren't laughing at her this time. Instead, they were talking to her, and the atmosphere around her was less tense. Richard took a step closer, his curiosity growing. He watched from a distance as the children spoke to Emma with genuine interest. They seemed to be asking questions, smiling at her, and, for once, she was smiling back. Richard couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of pride. Yesterday, she had been isolated, and today, she was at the center of attention. Though this time, it wasn't mockery. It was something different. Richard stood by the table, unsure of whether he should approach. He had already done his part, hadn't he? He had shared a meal with her, offered her kindness in a place where she had been made to feel small. But there was something about Emma's presence that drew him in. like an unfinished story that needed its next chapter. One of the children looked up and noticed Richard standing there. She nudged her friend, and soon, all eyes were on him. Emma's face lit up when she saw him, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, the words coming out almost as if she had to convince herself it was really him. She had remembered his name. Richard smiled at the thought. "Hello, Emma," he said, his voice warm. "It looks like you've made some new friends today." The children who had gathered around her seemed to recognize Richard immediately. They had seen him around before, in the company of other adults. The aura of authority he carried with him was undeniable. But there was something different in the way he was engaging with Emma. They had never seen him like this. Down to earth, genuine, and kind. "Can I sit with you?" Richard asked, his tone casual. The children looked at each other, then back at Emma, who nodded. "Sure," she said shyly. Her voice small but more confident than yesterday. Richard pulled a chair out and sat down beside Emma. The children around the table exchanged glances but didn't leave. Richard noticed how much quieter the cafeteria had become. The energy had shifted from one of teasing and mockery to something softer, something more peaceful. "Everything okay today?" Richard asked Emma, looking at her with concern. She nodded, her face still a little hesitant. "Yeah. The kids, they aren't laughing anymore." Richard smiled. "That's good to hear. You deserve to be treated kindly." Emma's eyes softened, and she glanced down at her lunchbox. "It's not much though," she said, a hint of insecurity creeping into her voice. "It's just bread and water." Richard looked at her lunchbox, then back at her. "Sometimes, simple is all you need," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "The value of a meal isn't in how much you have, but in the company you keep." Emma looked up at him, her eyes still a little unsure, but she seemed to understand. One of the children, a girl with glasses, spoke up. "I think bread and water sounds kind of cool," she said. "It's like something from a story. Like, you don't need fancy stuff to be happy." Richard chuckled softly. "That's exactly it. It's not about what you have in front of you, but about the moments you create, and the people you share them with." Emma's face brightened a little, a shy smile tugging at her lips. Richard could see the change in her. Yesterday, she had been downcast and uncertain, but now she seemed lighter, more at ease. The conversation around the table had become a source of comfort for her. And Richard could see how the other children were beginning to view her differently. They weren't seeing her as the girl with the broken lunchbox anymore. They were seeing her as someone they could talk to, someone who had value beyond the surface. Richard sat back in his chair, taking in the scene. He had thought he was just doing a small, kind thing by sitting with her the day before. But now, he realized that his presence had made a ripple in the cafeteria. He wasn't just offering Emma comfort. He was helping her find a place where she could stand tall, despite the teasing she had endured. The conversation continued around the table, with Emma becoming more comfortable as the minutes passed. The children were genuinely interested in her, asking questions, laughing at her jokes, and just being kids. It was a stark contrast to the isolation she had felt before. Richard watched the exchange with a quiet sense of satisfaction. This was what it meant to make a difference. Not just in grand gestures or grandiose actions, but in the small moments where one person's kindness could shift the course of someone's life. He wasn't just here to offer her a meal. He was here to give her a chance to be seen. As the lunch period came to an end, the children started to get up and head to their next class. Emma stood up as well. Her face now brighter, more confident than it had been when Richard had first arrived. She looked at him and smiled, the smile wider than it had been the day before. "Thank you," she said softly. Richard nodded. "You don't need to thank me. Just keep being you, Emma. And remember, there's always a place for you here." With that, Emma walked out of the cafeteria, her step lighter, her confidence growing with every day. Richard watched her go, feeling a quiet sense of pride in knowing he had been a part of something bigger than himself. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness could change the world, one lunch at a time. The next week passed by quickly, but something had changed at the cafeteria. The children who once mocked Emma for her simple lunch, now seemed to treat her differently. They greeted her in the hallways, shared smiles, and even invited her to join in their games. The transformation had been subtle, but it was undeniable. Richard, however, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Emma's story than he had realized. He had thought his small act of kindness was enough. But as the days passed, he began to notice the way Emma's eyes seemed to carry a sadness, a heaviness that didn't belong to a child her age. He had done his part in offering her a moment of peace, but now he wondered what else he could do. One afternoon, Richard found himself at the cafeteria once again. His mind filled with questions. He didn't have a plan, didn't know what he was looking for exactly. But something inside told him that he needed to see Emma again. As he entered the cafeteria, he saw her sitting alone, as she often did, though this time, there was no broken lunchbox, no bottle of water. Instead, Emma sat at the edge of a table, carefully drawing in a notebook. The other children were scattered around, but Emma had found her own space, her quiet corner where she could just be. Richard walked toward her, his footsteps deliberate. Emma looked up, and when she saw him, her face lit up. Just as it had the first time. It was a smile that always seemed to shine a little brighter whenever he showed up. "Hey, Emma." Richard greeted her warmly, his voice familiar. "Mind if I sit down?" She shook her head, gesturing toward the seat across from her. "No, I don't mind." Richard sat down, his eyes studying her drawing. The lines were simple, but the images were full of emotion. It was as if every stroke of the pencil told a story. One that Richard couldn't quite understand but felt was important. "What are you drawing?" he asked, leaning in slightly to get a better look. Emma paused for a moment, her eyes darting between her notebook and Richard. "It's a picture of a family," she said quietly. "A mom and a dad. And 2 kids." Richard's heart tightened at her words. He had known something about Emma's past, about her mother. But hearing her speak so simply about it made the reality hit harder. She wasn't just a girl with a broken lunchbox. She was a little girl who had lost something precious, something no child should ever have to lose. "Is this your family?" Richard asked gently, trying not to press too hard. Emma nodded slowly. "I remember them, but not really," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I remember their faces. But it's all fuzzy. Like a dream I can't catch." Richard was silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He had never been a father. He had never known what it was like to see a child struggle with loss, to witness the confusion and pain that came with it. But he couldn't ignore the depth of Emma's words. He couldn't just stand by and watch her carry this burden alone. "I can only imagine how hard that must be," Richard said softly. "But you're not alone, Emma. You have people around you who care." Emma looked up at him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "You really think so?" Richard smiled, his gaze steady. "I know so. And I'll always be here for you, Emma. Whenever you need someone to talk to." For a moment, Emma just stared at him, as if trying to make sense of his words. Slowly, a small smile appeared on her face. It was a hesitant smile, but it was a smile nonetheless. "Thank you," she whispered, almost as if she were afraid to believe it. Richard nodded. "You don't have to thank me. You deserve to have people in your life who care. Don't ever forget that." The rest of the lunch period passed by in relative quiet. Emma seemed more at ease, though there was still a quiet sadness behind her eyes. Richard understood that her journey wasn't going to be easy. The wounds of the past couldn't be healed overnight, but he was committed to being there for her, no matter how long it took. As they finished their lunch, Richard stood up and gathered his things. He didn't want to overstay his welcome, but he also didn't want to leave her alone too soon. "I'll see you tomorrow, Emma," he said, giving her one last warm smile. Emma nodded, her eyes still following him as he walked away. There was something different about her today. Something softer, more hopeful. Richard knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But it was a road they could walk together. As he left the cafeteria, Richard couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. He had made a promise to Emma. And he wasn't going to break it. He didn't know what the future held. But he was determined to be a part of her story. The next few days passed by with small but significant changes. Emma began to open up more, not just to Richard, but to the other children as well. they had noticed the difference in her. She no longer shrank back in the face of mockery or laughter. She stood her ground, and it made her stronger. Richard couldn't take credit for the changes, but he knew that his presence had played a part. One afternoon, as Richard was walking through the school hallways, he noticed Emma sitting outside reading a book. She was alone, but there was a peacefulness about her now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Richard walked up to her, smiling when she looked up. "Reading again, huh?" he asked. Emma smiled back, her eyes bright. "Yeah, I like books. They help me forget." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Forget what?" "Forget about the things that make me sad," she said, her voice soft. "Books take me to different places, and for a while, I don't feel alone." Richard's heart ached for her. But he knew this was part of her healing. She was finding her way piece by piece, and he was there to help guide her, every step of the way. "You're never alone, Emma," Richard said gently, sitting beside her. "And I'll always be here when you need me." Emma looked at him, her eyes shining with a new light. One that came from hope. She didn't have all the answers yet, and neither did Richard, but together, they were building something strong. Something that would help Emma find her way back to the life she deserved. 2. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of small victories. Emma's confidence continued to grow, slowly but surely, and Richard found himself drawn more into her world. What had started as a small act of kindness had now become something much more meaningful. He was no longer just a CEO passing through the cafeteria. He was someone Emma trusted, someone who had shown her that she wasn't alone, that there were people who cared. But there were still moments of doubt. Moments when Emma would retreat into herself, her smile fading, her eyes clouding over with the pain she had yet to fully process. Richard could see it in the way she would look at the other children, or the way she would grip her notebook a little too tightly when she thought no one was watching. There was still so much she hadn't said, so much she hadn't shared. One afternoon, as Richard was finishing up a meeting, he received a message from the school. Emma had asked to see him. The message didn't explain why, just that she needed to talk. It wasn't unusual for children to reach out for help. But Richard felt a tightness in his chest as he read the message. He knew Emma well enough by now to know when something was bothering her. He made his way to the school after the meeting, his mind racing with possibilities. What had happened? Was something wrong? When he arrived, he found Emma sitting alone in the same spot where they had shared lunch not long ago. Her lunchbox was nowhere to be seen, and she was staring out the window, lost in thought. Her body was slightly hunched, as if she were trying to disappear into the seat. Richard took a deep breath before walking over to her. His footsteps careful and quiet. "Hey, Emma," he said softly, sitting down beside her. Emma didn't look at him at first. She continued to stare out the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Richard could see the tension in her posture, the way her fingers twitched slightly, as if she were holding something back. "I didn't think you'd want to see me today," Emma finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard's heart sank at the sadness in her tone. "Of course I want to see you, Emma. What's going on?" She turned to face him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know, I just feel like I don't know if I'm doing things right. I don't know if I'm supposed to feel better. I'm trying. But it's hard." Richard's heart went out to her. He could hear the weight of her words, the burden she was carrying even though she was just a little girl. He reached out and gently placed a hand on hers, offering her the comfort of his presence. "Emma, you don't have to have everything figured out right now," Richard said gently. "Healing doesn't work like that. It's messy. Some days will be better than others. But no matter what, you don't have to go through this alone." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "But what if I never feel better? What if I always feel like this?" Richard's heart ached. "You won't always feel like this. I promise you. It takes time. But every day, every moment you spend moving forward, that's a step toward healing. You've already come so far, Emma. Don't sell yourself short." Emma let out a shaky breath, and Richard could see the tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know if I can do it," she whispered. Richard leaned in closer, his voice firm but kind. You don't have to do it alone. You have people around you who care, and I'm one of them. I'm always here, Emma, and I believe in you, no matter what. For a long moment, Emma didn't say anything. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. Richard was momentarily taken aback, but he quickly wrapped his arms around her, holding her in a comforting embrace. It's okay, Richard whispered, his voice steady. It's okay to feel this way. I'm not going anywhere. And Emma stayed in his arms for a while. Her sobs soft and quiet. Richard could feel the release of emotions she had been holding back, and he knew this was an important moment in her journey. She wasn't keeping everything bottled up anymore. She was allowing herself to feel, to grieve, and to let go of some of the pain she had been carrying for so long. As the sobs gradually quieted, Emma pulled away from him, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. She looked up at Richard, her face red from crying but her expression softening. Thank you, she whispered, her voice still a little shaky. Richard smiled gently. You don't need to thank me. I'm just here for you, Emma. That's all. Emma nodded, her gaze still fixed on him. I know I didn't think I could trust anyone with this. I'm honored that you do. Richard said sincerely. It means a lot to me, Emma. You're not alone in this. They sat together in silence for a while, the weight of the moment sinking in. Emma seemed quieter now. As if she had released some of the sadness that had been weighing on her for so long. Richard knew that there would still be difficult days ahead. But this was a breakthrough. A small step toward the healing that Emma needed. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the lunch period, Richard stood up and held out his hand to Emma. She hesitated for a moment before taking it, her grip steady and confident. Ready to head to class? Richard asked. Emma nodded, a small but genuine smile forming on her face. Yeah, I think I am. As they walked down the hallway together, Richard couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. Emma wasn't the same little girl he had met weeks ago. She had come so far. And though there was still more to her story, he knew that this moment was a turning point. Emma was beginning to understand that healing wasn't just about forgetting the past. It was about moving forward, with hope and trust in those who cared for her. Richard had promised to be there for her. And as he looked at her now, he knew he would continue to be there. Through the hard days, the good days, and every moment in between. The days following Emma's breakthrough were a mixture of progress and setbacks. She had started to open up more, not just to Richard, but to the other children as well. Her smile was brighter now, though the shadow of her past still lingered in her eyes. There were moments when she seemed almost like a normal child again, and then there were other moments when the weight of her loss would resurface, and she would withdraw into herself. Richard was learning how to navigate these moments with her, understanding that healing wasn't a straight path. There would be good days and bad days, but as long as he remained a steady presence in her life, he hoped that she would continue to grow stronger. It was a Friday afternoon when Emma approached Richard after lunch, her eyes serious but a little nervous. She had been quiet all through lunch, not joining in on the conversations like she usually did. Richard had noticed the change but hadn't pushed her to speak. He knew that when she was ready, she would come to him. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice soft but steady. Richard looked up from his phone, meeting her gaze. Hey, Emma. What's going on? She hesitated, glancing around the cafeteria as if making sure no one was listening. Then, she sat down across from him, folding her hands in her lap. I've been thinking, Emma started, her voice unsure. I want to know more about my mom and dad. I want to remember them better. But it's hard. I can't remember them clearly. Richard's heart tightened at her words. He had known this moment would come. The moment when Emma would want to confront her past, when she would want answers to the questions that had been plaguing her. But he also knew that the road to those answers wouldn't be easy for her. She was still so young, and some things were too painful to face head on. I understand, Emma, Richard said gently. It's okay to want to remember. But sometimes, our memories come back in pieces. And those pieces might be hard to put together. Emma nodded slowly, her eyes filled with determination. I want to try. I want to remember everything. Not just the blurry parts. Richard took a deep breath, considering her words carefully. It's a big thing to take on, Emma. And you don't have to do it alone. If you want, I can help you talk to someone, a counselor, maybe. Someone who can help you remember in a way that's not too overwhelming. But remember, it's okay if you don't have all the answers right away. Healing takes time. Emma's eyes met his, and for a moment, Richard saw something in her that he hadn't noticed before, a quiet strength. She was still scared, still uncertain, but she was ready to face her past. She wasn't running from it anymore. I want to try, Emma said again, her voice more certain this time. Richard smiled, proud of her. Then we'll take it one step at a time. And I'll be right here with you, every step of the way. Cool. The following week, Richard took Emma to a counselor who specialized in helping children deal with loss and trauma. At first, Emma was hesitant, unsure of what to expect. But Richard stayed by her side throughout the entire process, offering her quiet support. The counselor, a kind woman named Dr. Henderson, was gentle with Emma. She didn't push her to talk about anything she wasn't ready to face, but encouraged her to share when she felt comfortable. Over the course of a few sessions, Emma began to open up more. She spoke of her mother's laughter, of her father's warm hugs, and of the times when everything had felt safe and normal. But there were gaps in her memories, places where the pain of the past had blurred the details. And Richard could see the struggle in her eyes as she tried to make sense of it all. After one particularly difficult session, Emma came out of the office with tears in her eyes. Richard's heart broke at the sight of her, but he didn't say anything at first. He simply walked up to her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and led her to a nearby bench. Hey, he said softly. Do you want to talk about it? Emma shook her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. It's so hard. I want to remember, but it hurts too much. Richard nodded, understanding the weight of her words. It's okay to feel like that, Emma. Remembering doesn't mean you have to be okay all the time. Sometimes, the memories will come in pieces, and some pieces might hurt more than others. But that doesn't mean you're not strong. It means you're healing. Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with doubt. But what if I never feel okay again? Richard's heart ached. He couldn't promise her that everything would be perfect. He couldn't erase her pain, but he could promise her something else. You will feel okay again, Emma, Richard said firmly. You'll feel stronger, and you'll learn to carry the memories with you in a way that doesn't hurt as much. But no matter what, you don't have to do it alone. I'm here, and I always will be. Emma didn't respond right away. Instead, she sat quietly, her head resting on Richard's shoulder. Richard didn't rush her. He simply allowed her to be, offering her the comfort of his presence. He knew that sometimes, silence was the most healing thing a person could offer. When Emma finally lifted her head, her eyes were still wet, but there was a sense of relief in her expression. Thank you, she whispered. Richard smiled. You don't have to thank me. I'm here for you, Emma. I'll always be here. The days that followed were a mixture of small breakthroughs and setbacks. Emma still struggled with the pain of her past, but she was starting to find ways to cope with it. She had become more open in her sessions with Dr. Henderson, though the journey was far from easy. But with Richard's unwavering support, Emma began to learn how to navigate the emotions that had once overwhelmed her. One afternoon, as they walked out of school together, Emma looked up at Richard and smiled. A real, genuine smile. I'm starting to remember more, she said, her voice bright with hope. Some of it still hurts, but I think I'm okay with it now. Richard smiled back, feeling a swell of pride. You're doing great, Emma. And you'll keep doing great. Together, they walked down the hallway, the future uncertain but filled with possibilities. Richard knew there would be more difficult days ahead, but he also knew that Emma was no longer the scared little girl who had once felt lost and alone. She was growing stronger every day, and as long as he was there to support her, he knew she would continue to thrive. The weeks seemed to blur together in a quiet but steady march forward. Emma's journey was still filled with moments of doubt and pain. But there was something undeniably different about her now. Her smile had become more frequent, her laughter more genuine. The sadness that had once clung to her like a shadow was still there, but it was softer, more distant. Richard could see it in the way she carried herself now. She wasn't the fragile girl he had met months ago. She was learning to navigate her emotions and face the difficult parts of her past. But Richard knew there was still more to come. The memories were coming back to Emma in fragments, pieces of her mother's laugh, the feel of her father's hand on her shoulder, and moments of joy that were now clouded by the deep ache of loss. Sometimes she would sit in silence, her eyes distant, and Richard would give her space, knowing she would open up when she was ready. One afternoon, as Richard was leaving his office, his phone buzzed with a message from the school. It was Emma again. She wanted to talk. The message was short, but it made Richard's heart skip a beat. Every time she reached out like this, he felt a mix of concern and hope. What was on her mind now? He arrived at the school just as the bell rang, signaling the end of the day. He made his way to the courtyard, where he found Emma sitting on one of the benches. Her head was bowed, her shoulders slumped, and she looked like she was lost in thought. Richard approached quietly and sat down beside her, giving her the space she needed. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The noise of the school faded into the background as Richard just let her be. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, Emma spoke. "Mr. Cole. I've been thinking about my mom and dad a lot recently," she said, her voice soft but steady. "About how they were before everything changed. Before everything went wrong." Richard nodded, his heart aching for her. He knew this was a difficult place for Emma to go. But he also knew it was necessary. She had to remember the good moments before she could fully heal from the pain. "What are you remembering?" Richard asked gently, his tone calm and understanding. Emma looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "I remember how my mom would sing to me before bed. She had this soft voice. And it always made me feel safe. And my dad. He used to play catch with me in the backyard. He'd throw the ball really high, and I'd try to catch it. I wasn't very good at it, but he always told me I was." Richard could see the shift in Emma's face as she spoke. There was a softness in her expression now. A quiet fondness that was almost like a light in the darkness. For a moment, she seemed to be lost in the memories, and Richard let her have that time. It was important that she could remember the love they had shared, even if it hurt. But then, Emma's voice wavered, and Richard felt a lump form in his throat. Then everything changed. She finished, her words full of pain. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her the comfort of his presence. "It's okay to feel that way, Emma. You're allowed to miss them. But you're also allowed to remember the good parts. They're still a part of you. No matter what happened." Emma nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I just wish I could remember more. I want to hold on to those memories, but sometimes it's hard." Richard smiled gently. "Memories can be tricky. Sometimes, they come when you least expect them. And sometimes, they come with pain. But remember, Emma, they are part of your story. And no matter how painful they may be, they make you who you are. You don't have to hold on to them forever. You just have to let them be part of you, and then you can keep moving forward." Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "But what if I can't move forward?" Richard's heart broke at the question. He had seen Emma grow so much over the past months. But he understood that her journey wasn't linear. There would still be setbacks, moments when the past would rear its ugly head, and make her question everything. "Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting, Emma," Richard said softly. "It means learning how to live with everything that's happened. It means giving yourself the grace to feel the sadness, the grief, and then finding the strength to keep going. One day, you won't feel like you're carrying the weight of it all. But for now, it's okay to feel heavy. It's okay to struggle." Emma leaned her head against Richard's shoulder, and for a long moment, they just sat there together. Richard wasn't sure how long they sat in silence, but he wasn't in a rush to break it. Sometimes, the best thing he could do for her was to simply be there. No words needed. Eventually Emma broke the silence. "Do you think they would be proud of me?" she asked quietly. Richard's heart tightened at the question. He knew how important it was for Emma to feel seen and loved, especially after everything she had been through. He turned to her, his gaze steady. "Of course they would be proud of you, Emma," Richard said firmly. "You're strong, you're kind, and you've come so far. I know they would be proud of you, no matter what." Emma smiled softly, a faint blush creeping into her cheeks. "I hope so." Richard smiled back. "I know so." For the first time in a long while, Emma seemed at peace. The sadness was still there, but there was a quiet strength in her now, something that hadn't been there before. She was beginning to understand that her past didn't define her. It was a part of her, yes, but it wasn't all of who she was. She had the power to create her future, to shape the person she was becoming. As they stood up from the bench, Emma turned to Richard with a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "I think I can keep going now." Richard nodded, feeling a sense of pride wash over him. "You've always been able to keep going, Emma. I'm just here to remind you of that when you forget." Together, they walked back toward the school. The weight of the past still there but no longer overwhelming. Emma was learning to carry it, to live with it. And Richard knew that she was stronger than she realized. As the school year continued, Emma's progress was steady, though not without its ups and downs. Richard had witnessed her slowly open up in ways he hadn't expected. Her walls, built high over time to protect herself from the pain of losing her parents, had started to crumble. But even as the walls came down, there were moments when Emma would retreat. Moments when the past would come crashing back and threaten to pull her under. It was early spring when Richard noticed a shift in Emma's demeanor. She had been quieter than usual, her smile less frequent, and the spark in her eyes had dimmed. He knew that these moments were part of the healing process. But something about this felt different. Emma had reached a point where she was no longer just reflecting on her past. She was beginning to face the future. And the uncertainty that came with it was something she wasn't quite ready for. One day, as Richard was finishing up his work in the office, he received a call from the school. Emma had asked to speak with him. The tone of the message was urgent, and Richard's heart skipped a beat. He immediately left his office, his mind racing. What was happening now? When he arrived at the school, Emma was waiting for him outside, sitting on the same bench where they had shared so many quiet conversations before. Her body was slightly hunched, and her eyes were downcast. Richard could tell right away that something was wrong. "Hey Emma," Richard said softly, approaching her. "What's going on?" Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She hesitated before speaking, as if the words were difficult to find. I don't know what to do anymore," she said, her voice small, almost fragile. "I'm scared." Richard sat down beside her, his gaze gentle. "Scared of what?" Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Scared of moving on," she whispered. "I don't know if I can. It feels like if I do, I'm forgetting my mom and dad. Like if I keep going, I'll lose them forever." Richard's heart ached as he listened to her. He understood the weight of what she was saying. The fear of forgetting her parents was a fear Emma hadn't yet fully faced, and now it was holding her back. He placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her the comfort she needed, but also the space to be honest with herself. "Emma, moving on doesn't mean forgetting," Richard said softly. "It doesn't mean leaving your parents behind. It means finding a way to honor their memory while also living your life. They're a part of you, and always will be. But you don't have to carry all that pain with you every day. You don't have to keep yourself stuck in the past." Emma's eyes filled with tears. But she didn't cry. Instead she wiped her eyes and looked at him, her face filled with confusion. "But what if I forget them? What if I forget what they were like? Or the things they taught me?" Richard took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "You won't forget them, Emma. The love you shared with them is something no one can take away from you. The memories may fade, but the lessons they taught you, the love they gave you, that will always be with you. It's not about remembering every detail. It's about holding on to the love they gave you and letting that love guide you forward." Emma sat in silence for a while, processing Richard's words. Richard knew that she wasn't ready to completely let go of the past, and he didn't expect her to. But he hoped she could begin to understand that her parents would always be a part of her. She didn't have to fear moving forward. "I'm just so afraid of leaving them behind," Emma said quietly. "It feels like if I start moving forward, I'm betraying them. I don't want to forget them." Richard nodded, his voice calm and reassuring. "I understand, Emma. But think about it this way. By moving forward, you're honoring their memory. You're showing them that their love and everything they gave you didn't go to waste. They would want you to live a full life. They would want you to be happy." Emma looked up at him, her expression still uncertain. "But what if I don't know how? What if I can't?" Richard smiled gently. "You don't have to know everything right now. The path forward will look different for everyone. But the most important thing is that you keep going. One small step at a time." Well, for the first time in days, Emma's lips curled into a small but genuine smile. It wasn't the brightest smile, but it was a start. She nodded slowly, the fear in her eyes still there, but beginning to shift toward something else. Something more hopeful. "Okay," Emma said, her voice more confident than it had been all afternoon. I'll try to move forward." Richard placed a hand on her back, offering her the support she needed. "That's all I can ask. And I'll be right here. Every step of the way." In the days that followed, Emma began to take small steps toward embracing the future. She started participating more in class, engaging with her friends, and even joining in on some of the activities that had once felt too overwhelming. She still had moments of doubt. Moments when the fear of moving forward would rise up again. But each time, she would remember Richard's words and take another step, no matter how small. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Emma approached Richard after school, a hesitant but excited look on her face. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice almost shy. I want to try something new. I want to join the school play." Richard raised an eyebrow, surprised by her sudden declaration. "The school play? That's a big step, Emma. Are you sure?" Emma nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "I think it's time for me to try something new. I've been holding on to the past for so long, and I think it's time to make some new memories." Richard smiled, proud of her. "I think that's a great idea, Emma. You're ready for this. I know you are." As Emma walked away, a new sense of purpose in her step, Richard couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. She had faced her fears, and though it wasn't easy, she was moving forward. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Richard felt hopeful about what the future would hold for Emma. Spring was in full bloom, and the days seemed brighter, more vibrant. Emma had slowly but surely begun to find her place again, not just at school, but within herself. After deciding to join the school play, she had committed to her decision wholeheartedly. The rehearsals were intense, and although she had her doubts and fears, she pushed herself forward. Every line she learned, every character she embodied, was a small victory, a step away from the shadows of the past. Richard had been there every step of the way, offering encouragement when the doubts crept in, reminding her how far she had come since their first meeting. Emma had come to trust him deeply, and his belief in her had given her a new strength, one she hadn't known she possessed. But the road was still filled with challenges, and there were days when she questioned her ability to move forward. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting rehearsal, Emma found herself sitting outside the school, staring up at the sky. The rehearsals had drained her, but there was something about the quiet moment that felt like it was giving her the space she needed to breathe. Richard spotted her from a distance and walked over, noticing the quiet look on her face. He could tell something was on her mind, and he wasn't about to let her face it alone. "Hey, Emma," Richard said gently, sitting down beside her. She didn't respond right away, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. Richard didn't push her. Knowing that sometimes silence spoke louder than words, he simply sat next to her, offering her the comfort of his presence. After a moment, Emma spoke up, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Mr. Cole, what if I'm not good enough for this? What if I mess up in the play? What if everyone sees that I'm not who they think I am?" Richard's heart broke for her, but he remained calm. He knew this was a moment of vulnerability for Emma, and she needed to know that she wasn't alone in her fears. "Emma," Richard began, his voice steady but kind. "It's okay to be scared. It's okay to feel like you're not good enough sometimes. But what matters is that you're showing up. You're trying. That's what makes you strong." Emma looked at him, her eyes searching his face for the reassurance she needed. "But what if I fail?" Richard smiled softly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Everyone fails, Emma. Everyone. But it's not about the failure itself, it's about what you do after. Do you give up? Or do you keep going? You've already shown that you're willing to keep going, even when things get tough. That's what matters. And I have no doubt that you'll do great in the play. Not because you're perfect, but because you're brave enough to try." For a long moment, Emma didn't say anything. She just sat there, her eyes reflecting the inner conflict she was facing. But slowly, a small smile began to form on her lips. It wasn't the big, confident smile she sometimes wore, but it was real, gentle, and sincere. "You really think I can do this?" she asked quietly. Richard nodded. "I know you can. You've already come so far. And this is just another step. Don't worry about what anyone else thinks. This is your moment. Take it." Emma took a deep breath, the weight of her fear still there but lightened by Richard's words. She had come so far. And the thought of failing no longer felt like an insurmountable wall. She realized with his support, that it was okay to make mistakes. It was okay to be imperfect. What mattered was her willingness to face her fears, to stand in the spotlight despite the doubt. The following week, the day of the play arrived. And Emma was filled with a nervous excitement. The anxiety of stepping onto the stage was still there, but she was no longer paralyzed by it. Richard had been with her every step of the way, offering her encouragement and reminding her of how far she had come. As the audience filled the theater, Emma stood backstage, taking deep breaths. The lights in the auditorium shone brightly, but the real spotlight was waiting for her on stage. She felt the butterflies in her stomach, but instead of retreating from them, she embraced them. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. The moment the curtain rose, Emma stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. But as she stood there, in front of the audience, something shifted within her. The fear didn't disappear, but she no longer let it dictate her actions. She delivered her lines with confidence, each word stronger than the last. And as the play progressed, Emma found herself lost in the role she was playing, in the world she had created on stage. Richard sat in the audience, watching with pride as Emma performed. He could see the transformation in her. She wasn't just a girl facing the fear of failure. She was a young woman embracing her power, her strength. The play wasn't perfect, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that Emma was standing tall, owning her space, and doing something she never thought possible. By the time the final curtain fell, Emma was breathless, her heart racing, but she was smiling. Real, triumphant smile. The applause from the audience felt like a distant hum, but in that moment, it was the only sound that mattered. She had done it. She had faced her fear and stepped into the spotlight. After the play, Richard found Emma backstage, still glowing from the experience. She was surrounded by her classmates, but when she saw Richard, she made her way over to him, a look of pure joy on her face. "I did it," Emma said, her voice filled with awe. "I actually did it." Richard smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I knew you could. I was so scared," she admitted, her voice soft, "but once I was up there, it didn't feel so bad. It felt right. Like I was finally doing something for me." Richard nodded. "That's what it's all about, Emma. Doing something for yourself. You've come so far, and I'm so proud of you." Emma's smile widened. "Thank you for believing in me. I never would have done this without you." Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with sincerity. "You did it. Emma, you believed in yourself. That's what matters." As the night came to an end, Emma walked off the stage. Her heart still racing but filled with a new sense of purpose. She had faced her fears, taken that step into the unknown, and emerged stronger than ever. She knew that there would still be challenges ahead. But for the first time, she felt ready to face them. And with Richard by her side, She knew she would never have to face them alone. 2. The school play had been a turning point for Emma. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, facing her fears head on, and come out the other side stronger and more confident. The applause, the praise from her friends and teachers, it was all a blur. But the most important thing was what she had discovered about herself. She was capable of more than she had ever believed. However, even with all the success, there were still moments when doubt crept in. Emma wasn't immune to the lingering insecurities that often surfaced after such an intense experience. The next few days at school were a mixture of celebration and quiet reflection. Emma had moments when she felt like she had truly turned a corner, but other times, the fear of losing the progress she had made weighed heavily on her. One morning, after a quiet breakfast at home, Emma sat down on the steps outside the school, waiting for the bell to ring. Her thoughts were preoccupied with everything she had done, everything she had accomplished. But for some reason, today, there was a restlessness in her. A feeling that something was missing, that she had yet to fully grasp what her victory meant. Richard had been quiet for the past few days, allowing Emma space to reflect. But he had noticed her distant expression that morning as they had walked to school. He was aware that Emma's journey was far from over, and there were still so many layers of her healing to uncover. Emma might have taken a huge step forward, but Richard knew that there were still doubts in her heart that she hadn't voiced yet. When Richard approached her that morning, he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Hey, Emma," he said softly, sitting down beside her on the steps. "You okay?" Emma didn't immediately respond. She just stared ahead, her fingers tracing the edges of her notebook as she sat silently. Richard waited, knowing that Emma would speak when she was ready. After a few moments, Emma finally spoke, her voice soft, tinged with the vulnerability Richard had come to know. "I did the play, but..." She paused, trying to find the right words. "I thought it would make me feel different. Like, I would be proud of myself, and I am, but something's still missing. I thought once I did that, everything would click, and I'd finally be okay. But it didn't happen that way. I'm still scared of failing. I'm scared that no matter how hard I try, I'll never be good enough." Richard looked at her, understanding the pain in her voice. He knew that Emma had made tremendous strides, but what she was feeling now wasn't something that could just be erased with one accomplishment. "Emma," Richard said softly, "I think you're searching for something bigger than just a single moment. You're looking for validation. But you've already proven to yourself that you're capable. You've already shown yourself how strong you are. The play was just one part of your journey, one step on a much longer road. It's okay to still feel scared. It's okay to still have doubts. But what matters is that you don't let them stop you." Emma turned to him, her eyes filled with confusion and a bit of fear. "But what if I keep failing? What if I keep trying and it's never enough?" Richard smiled gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "There's no such thing as never enough, Emma. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up. Every time you face your fears and push through, that's a victory. And every step you take, no matter how small, gets you closer to who you're meant to be." For a moment, Emma was quiet again, processing his words. The restlessness she had felt earlier began to subside, replaced by the realization that the journey she was on was ongoing. There was no finish line to cross. It was about the continual growth, the moments of struggle, and the strength to keep moving forward despite it all. "I guess I've been waiting for this big moment where everything magically feels okay," Emma said, her voice more certain now. "But maybe that's not how it works. Maybe it's about accepting the process, even when it's messy." Richard nodded. "Exactly. Healing and growth aren't linear. They don't happen all at once. They happen in pieces, sometimes in big steps, and other times, in quiet, small moments. And that's okay. What matters is that you're still here. Still trying." Emma smiled softly, her gaze steady. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. I think I've been expecting myself to be okay all at once. But I see now that it's okay to take my time." Richard returned her smile. "Of course. It's always okay to take your time. And you don't have to do it alone. I'll be here, every step of the way." The bell rang, signaling the start of the school day, and Emma stood up, feeling lighter than she had in days. The burden of perfectionism that had weighed so heavily on her chest seemed to lift, if only for a moment. She was learning that it was okay to not have all the answers, that it was okay to still be uncertain. Healing wasn't about an instant transformation. It was about being patient with herself, and accepting that the journey was just as important as the destination. The following days felt different. Emma started to speak up more in class, her confidence growing with each passing day. She was no longer afraid of making mistakes in front of others. Instead, she embraced the opportunity to learn from them. There was still fear inside her, but it no longer controlled her. One afternoon, as Emma sat in the library, her notebook open in front of her, she realized something. She was no longer just a girl trying to get by. She was a girl who was learning to take charge of her life, to embrace her imperfections and still push forward. She didn't have all the answers, but she had something far more valuable: the courage to keep going. As she closed her notebook, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of it. She was ready to face whatever came next with an open heart. And with Richard's unwavering support, she knew she would always have someone by her side to help her through it. As the days grew warmer, and the end of the school year drew nearer, Emma felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She had come so far in the past months, transforming from the quiet, uncertain girl who had first met Richard into someone who was beginning to understand her own strength. Yet, there were still moments when doubt would creep in. Moments when she questioned if she was truly ready to leave the past behind. Richard had been a steady presence in her life, offering guidance when she needed it and space when she required time to reflect. But the biggest lesson he had given her was that healing wasn't a destination. It was an ongoing process. Emma had learned that it was okay to struggle. That it was okay to not have everything figured out. But now, as she faced the looming transition to the next chapter of her life, there was still one thing holding her back. Letting go. She hadn't fully let go of the pain she carried. Her parents, their memory, their love, they were still a constant presence in her heart. But there were moments when the weight of that loss felt unbearable. The fear of losing them, of forgetting them, still lingered in the corners of her mind. One afternoon, as the school year came to a close, Richard invited Emma to join him for a walk. They had been working together on the project of helping Emma face her fears, and Richard sensed that she was ready to take the next step. She had spoken to him about the difficulty of moving forward, without leaving her parents behind. And he knew that this moment was crucial for her. As they walked through the quiet park, the warm breeze ruffling the leaves of the trees, Richard turned to her with a soft smile. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Emma hesitated for a moment, her fingers trailing along the edge of a bench as they passed by. "I don't know," she said, her voice low. "I'm scared, Mr. Cole. I'm scared of forgetting them. Of letting go of the pain." Richard stopped walking and looked at her, his gaze steady and understanding. "Emma, letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding peace with the past, so it doesn't hold you back anymore. It means carrying the love they gave you, but also giving yourself the chance to live your life fully." Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "But what if I can't? What if the past is too big to let go of?" Richard took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "It's not about erasing the past, Emma. You can't undo what happened. But you can choose how you let it shape you. You don't have to carry the weight of that pain forever. You can hold on to their love, but you also have to allow yourself to grow beyond the grief. If you keep holding on to it, it will stop you from becoming the person you're meant to be." And Emma's heart ached at the thought. She had always feared that letting go of the pain would somehow mean she was forgetting her parents, as if moving forward would erase their memory. But now, as Richard's words sank in, she began to understand that healing didn't require forgetting. It required accepting the love they had given her, and letting that love help her move forward. "I'm scared," Emma said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "But I think I understand what you mean. It's just so hard." Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her the comfort she needed. Healing is always hard, Emma. It's not easy. And it doesn't happen all at once. But you've already made incredible progress. You've learned to embrace the fear, to keep going even when it feels overwhelming. And that's the most important part. They continued their walk, the silence between them comfortable. But there was something shifting in Emma. The weight she had been carrying didn't feel as heavy anymore. And though the fear was still there, it wasn't all consuming. She realized that it wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to honor it while moving forward. That evening, Emma sat alone in her room, reflecting on their conversation. She had been holding on to so many things: grief, anger, sadness. And those things had become the very things that defined her. But Richard was right. She couldn't live in the past forever. She couldn't let it keep her from growing. With trembling hands, Emma reached for her journal. She hadn't written in it much lately, but tonight, something inside her urged her to do so. As she opened the notebook to the last page, she began to write, "Mom, Dad, I miss you so much. I still think about you every day. Sometimes it feels like you're just around the corner, and I'll hear your voices again. But I know you're not coming back, and I need to find a way to live without you. I don't want to forget you. I want to carry you with me, in my heart, in everything I do. But I also want to start living my life. I want to make you proud. I know I have to let go, but I'll never forget you. You'll always be with me. No matter what. I love you always." When she finished writing, Emma closed the notebook and placed it on her bedside table. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace of forgetting, but the peace of acceptance. She had found a way to carry her parents with her, without allowing their loss to define her. The next morning, Emma woke up with a sense of clarity. She wasn't entirely free from the past, but she had learned to live with it. She knew that healing was a journey, one that would continue long after the school year ended. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the future. She was ready to face it. As the summer break approached, Emma's world began to open up. She spent more time with friends. She focused on her passions, and she began to explore new possibilities. She still had difficult days, but now she had the tools to cope. And she had learned that it was okay to take it one step at a time. And through it all, Richard remained by her side. A constant source of support, encouragement, and guidance. She had come so far, but she knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be moments of doubt, moments when the past would come rushing back. But now, Emma knew that she had the strength to face whatever came her way. She was ready to live her life, to make her own path, and to honor the love her parents had given her, by becoming the person they would have been proud of. It had been months since Emma first met Richard, since the day he had sat beside her in the cafeteria, offering her a simple act of kindness. Since then, Emma had come so far. Her fears, her grief, and her self-doubt had been met with moments of courage, small victories, and deep healing. She had learned to let go of the past, embrace the future, and accept that healing wasn't a one-time event. It was a lifelong journey. But even with all the progress she had made, Emma knew that there was still one thing she had to do. A final step in her healing process. She had been holding on to the past for so long, and while she had made peace with it, she hadn't fully allowed herself to let go of the hurt. There was still a part of her that feared forgetting, that feared that if she let go too much, she might lose the memories of her parents. The sun was setting that evening, casting a warm golden glow across the sky. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that made you feel like time had slowed down. Richard had asked Emma to meet him by the lake, a place where they had often walked during the past months. This was where Emma had faced so many of her fears, where she had found comfort in Richard's presence, and where she had learned to move forward. She arrived at the lake, feeling a mixture of nerves and anticipation. As she walked toward the water's edge, she saw Richard standing there, looking out at the horizon. He turned when he heard her footsteps, a soft smile forming on his face. "Hey Emma," he greeted warmly. "Hey Mr. Cole," Emma replied, her voice steady, though she could feel her heart racing. She knew what she had to do, but it wasn't going to be easy. Richard studied her for a moment, sensing the weight of the moment. "Are you ready for this?" he asked gently. Emma nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. I think I am. Richard stepped closer, his presence calm and reassuring. You've come so far, Emma. Whatever you're about to do, just know that I'm proud of you. And I always will be. Emma smiled at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. But even as she smiled, the weight of the decision she had made pressed heavily on her. This wasn't just another step forward. This was a moment of closure. A moment when she would finally let go. Taking another breath, Emma walked toward the water's edge. She could feel the cool breeze brushing against her skin, and the sound of the water lapping at the shore seemed to steady her nerves. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. The letter she had written for her parents. She had written it months ago, but today, she was finally ready to say goodbye. Turning to Richard, Emma held up the letter. This is for them, she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. Richard nodded, understanding. You're ready, Emma. When you're ready, you can let go of the past and set it free. With a final glance at the letter, Emma stepped to the edge of the water. Her heart was racing, but this was the moment she had been waiting for. She wasn't letting go of the memories. She was simply releasing the pain that had kept her from moving forward. Emma held the letter in her hand for a moment longer, and then, with one final breath, she released it into the water. The current carried it away, gently pulling it into the lake. As Emma watched the letter float further out, she felt something inside her shift. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long seemed to lift. The grief, the guilt, the fear, it all started to melt away. And as the letter disappeared from view, Emma felt lighter than she had in years. She didn't feel like she was forgetting her parents. She felt like she was honoring them in the best way possible. By living her life without being weighed down by the pain. She had let go, not of their memory, but of the hurt that had held her back. Richard stood beside her, his eyes filled with quiet pride. You did it, he said softly. You finally set yourself free. Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. Not of sorrow, but of release. I feel lighter, she whispered, a smile breaking through her tears. I didn't think it was possible. Richard smiled warmly. It's always possible, Emma. Healing takes time. But you've made it. You're free. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt truly free. She could feel the presence of her parents in her heart. But the burden of grief no longer ruled her life. She had learned to carry their love with her, without being consumed by the pain of their loss. As they stood there by the water, the sun dipping below the horizon, Emma knew that her journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still moments of fear. But she also knew that she was strong enough to face them. She had come so far, and with Richard by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. Turning to Richard, Emma gave him a grateful smile. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. Richard nodded, his voice filled with warmth. You did the hard work, Emma. I'm just glad I could be here to support you. You're going to do amazing things. I know it. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Emma realized that she had finally found her voice. She wasn't the girl who had walked into the cafeteria all those months ago. Unsure of who she was or where she was going. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone ready to take on the world. She was ready for the future. Thank you again for being a part of this journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you learn from this story? If you've experienced something similar, feel free to share your story with us in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who might need this message.